timings again.
Fine. Thank you, sir. I want to thank Dr. Namrata and DDG for this opportunity. I have titled my talk the following: Asian security contentions, trends and scenarios. Basically, I'm going to look at two key contentions that I think are representative of an animated security discourse pertaining to two critical sub-regions of Asia, which is Southeast Asia and West Asia. These are the maritime territorial disputes in South China Sea and the Iranian nuclear contentions in West Asia. I'm going to look at the relevant dynamics impinging on these contentions to delineate the drivers that that are responsible for the key trends associated with these contentions, and then I'll highlight briefly Indian interests and approaches vis-a-vis these contentions, and then briefly lay out the possible policy imperatives for India. Based on two scenarios that could unfold regarding each of these contentions over the course of the near to mid-term future. This is the structure of a presentation. Two of those contentions: India's interest and stakes, alternate scenarios, and policy imperatives for India. Firstly, the maritime territorial disputes in Asia. I'm begin with. I'm not an expert on this. We've had a lot of discussion over the past 2 days, but briefly, these are the 5 things that come to mind when you talk about these disputes. The assertive strategic behavior, primarily the Chinese, from the Chinese side, but also other countries are also being very assertive in holding on to their positions regarding, as pointed out, this 11 square kilometers of land in the South China Sea. And then there is trade linkages and the rising military capabilities of countries of the region. The US military presence, which is a preeminent Indo-Asia Pacific path, as the Americans call it, and we call it the Indo-Pacific. And of course, as we talked about in the morning, the ASEAN security community is stillborn. There are a lot of uncertainties regarding that. Firstly, the assertive strategic behavior, all of us know, but briefly, Chinese declaration of the ADIZ in November 2013, which is the Air Defense Identification Zone. There were concerns that they're going to do that. They did that in the East China Sea. There are concerns that they're going to do that in South China Sea also. A lot of opposition to that. Not just such unilateral declarations, but bilaterally, China, Vietnam, for instance, there's a lot of problem which we had seen last year. Anti-Chinese riots in Vietnam because of skirmishes in the sea between Vietnamese and Chinese Coast Guard vessels, because China put in a oil rig in the South China Sea, which eventually had to take out because of these skirmishes. And then we've also seen other countries, Philippines for instance, very aggressive, the Coast Guard. A Taiwanese fisherman was killed in May 2013, for instance. These disputes in the South China Sea play in the backdrop of China's unresolved territorial claims on Taiwan, and of course border disputes with India, and also with increasingly robust naval forays in the Indian Ocean. Indian analysts have said China is basically a continental power, but its Indian Ocean forays indicate that it's stretching its sea legs. This was our own Gurpreet Khurana in one of his writings regarding the Chinese diesel submarines making port calls in Sri Lanka on their way, as they say, to the Gulf of Eden and in anti-piracy patrols. Second issue that I want to highlight is the trade linkages. All of us know, but briefly, China ASEAN trade currently is about less than, if I'm not mistaken, $500 billion. Now they want to increase that to $1 trillion by in another 5 years, which is huge. India ASEAN trade is about $75 billion, and both these partners want to increase that to about $200 billion by 2022. So there's a huge trade that takes place. The US investments in the region very huge, about $200 billion in ASEAN countries, which is more than the investments in Brazil, China, India and Russia combined. So they have a lot of stakes. These security dilemmas play in the backdrop of such bring to bear uncertainties, potential for conflict in this region of such thickening trade. The rising military capabilities, the defense budgets are increasing. Of course, they are investing in new capabilities, submarines, anti-ballistic missile systems, helicopter carriers. Japan, for instance, 27,000 helicopter carriers. It's going to be commissioned next month, which is the biggest Japanese naval vessel since the end of the Second World War. South Korea has a new submarine command. Malaysia, Vietnam have ordered new kilo class submarines. fighter aircraft. So there's a huge range of upgrade to inventory that's taking place in these countries. Basically, and I've got sorry. Yeah, military modernization, for instance. I was just talking about this. So. Yes, the U.S. military presence, of course, is very ubiquitous. The Pacific Fleet is a huge presence there. 84 ships. The 7th Fleet is in Yokosuka, Japan. Now the pivot to Asia. The American naval strength about 300 ships. Now, if I'm not mistaken, so they're going to add 50 more ships by 2020. Pivot to Asia is going to mature by 2020, according to the Defense Department, Pentagon. So there's a huge increase in U.S. military capabilities. 50,000 troops in Japan, 30,000 troops in South Korea, and then the fifth point that I want to highlight is we've discussed that in the morning. The Asian Security Community, 2003, the idea was promulgated, and they're supposed to see it mature by 2020. But as we have indicated, as we have seen, a lot of problems in realizing this. What are India's interests? As I've indicated, the trade, $75 billion. But India's bilateral trade with countries, not just ASEAN, but I've included Australia, Japan, South Korea here, Taiwan also. There's a huge trade that takes place. So any disturbance here is going to be problematic for India's own growth. India's energy imports from ASEAN for the past 5 years about 11 to 12%, which is a good figure. For as far as India is concerned, because India has these interests, we have stressed the cooperative security solutions to resolve the South China Sea disputes. I just want to highlight Prime Minister Modi's statement at the 9th East Asia Summit in November last year, and I quote: our region has a number of complex and unresolved questions in the area of security. There is a need for serious and sustained dialogue, and it goes on to say that it's important to follow international law and norms for peace and stability in the South China Sea, and he hoped that efforts to conclude a code of conduct on South China Sea would be successful soon. India has enhanced its diplomatic, economic and military engagement with the countries of the region. My paper has some details regarding some of these countries: Australia, Japan, Myanmar. We do patrols. So and Japan, as we come to know yesterday, as it was pointed out yesterday, annual summits. Only the second country after Russia that we're going to do. Australia is very huge cooperation in peaceful use of nuclear energy. And other countries also equally robust. Singapore, of course, is very pertinent. Indonesia, we have biannual coordinated patrols that we do. Defense minister visited in October 2012 for the first ever ministerial level defense dialogue. Malaysia, of course, we have there are a lot of training programs and things that take place. Philippines was interested apparently in defense cooperation with India, especially in the face of reports that China was transforming one of the reefs in the Spratly Islands into a naval base. And we have held out $100 million defense procurement budget to I think Vietnam, if I'm not mistaken, which they can use to buy defense equipment from us. So these are the stakes that we have vis-a-vis this region. Next, I want to go to my next contention, the Iran nuclear issues. There was talk about West Asia not being covered in the morning. I think this is very important. We have been affected by this issue. Briefly, 5 drivers that have determined the cause of this problem. The lack of progress in diplomatic efforts. 2002 was when the initial issue came to light, and then it was referred to the UN Security Council. 2006. Since then, there have been many efforts. P5+1, June 2006. It's been an uneven process. There's been no effective solution. This has led to what I term the politicized safeguards. The problem with the IAEA implementing its safeguards inside Iran. Iran not giving access to facilities. Its contention being these are not nuclear facilities but military facilities, but the IAEA insisting the Iran could have done nuclear related activities at those facilities. So there's a lot of problem. regarding that. So these contentions led to non-resolution of concerns, further fueling the problem. Then the third issue that I want to highlight was the contentious bilateral ties between Iran and interlocutors, which has really poisoned the diplomatic process. Primarily the US-Iran relations come to mind. Of course, US-UK relations are also pertinent. There was a ransacking of the British embassy. Both of the countries have diplomatic ties, so they had to close down the embassy. Now there are reports after the JPOA November joint plan of action that the British are going to restart their embassy. So the fourth issue is unilateral sanctions measures. Apart from the UN mandated sanctions and a lot of sanctions by the Americans, by the European Union, which have led to third party effects. These are third party sanctions almost. Countries like India had to be affected because of we had to reduce our imports from oil from Iran, and the joint plan of action it's currently being they have agreed for the joint plan of action. They want to go for the comprehensive joint plan of action, but there are problems. 1 year they couldn't do it since November 2014, January 2014 to January 20 this November they again increased it to another 6 months. So that's a process. It depends on if how the issue is going to pan out. India's interest, as indicated, West Asia very important, trade, of course, people. We have different estimates, but at least 6 million trade. This is the trade with West Asia, very important partners. Huge amount of trade that takes place. There is this imports from West Asia, 60% almost. So with ASEAN and East Asian countries that are indicated, almost 70% of our trade is energy comes from these two areas where these contentions are playing out currently. And as I indicated, we had to reduce our imports of oil from Iran. India has consistently said that dialogue and diplomacy are the way forward. We have opposed military strikes. The Americans have been very cautious on this, but the Israelis have been very robust, indicating that the only real solution to this is a military strike. But we have said, this is problematic. We have core interests there, and our people. It's negative to regional stability and these issues. Finally, just some scenarios how these drivers will pan out. These are the 5 drivers that on each of these issues, and I've talked about categorize the current situation as strategic flux. 2 possible scenarios: strategic moderation or ascent and brinkmanship. Strategic moderation is plausible, which means can happen. I bet my chips on this. Ascent and brinkmanship, it's possible, may or may not happen, but not likely to happen if certain things take place like the way they have to. For instance, if there is enhanced coordination, for instance, among these countries in South China Sea, to avoid eventualities, there is a trade imperative. It leads to if it leads to reduced security dilemmas, but that's a huge debate in itself. Does trade in fact contribute to security dilemmas, or does it mitigate security dilemmas? But I think if it's $1 trillion trade between India and ASEAN, between China and ASEAN by 2020, I think that's going to be a huge factor. So these are the 2, and similar with the Iranian nuclear contentions. I think the only issue here is the joint plan of action, comprehensive. If it's they're successful, and indications are it could be successful in a couple of months. So as a result of that, Iran ratifies the additional protocol. There's the progress in diplomatic efforts that a nuclear deal could assuage the bilateral contentions to some extent. So I think there's a greater chance of strategic moderation occurring in West Asia as a result of Iranian nuclear deal also. But that's not a panacea for all the problems that exist, but that at least addresses one of the contentions. The policy imperatives, finally, I just want to highlight the fact that India is a vulnerable regional power. I'm sorry. So I think we have to reduce vulnerabilities. We have to enhance the strategic engagement with countries in West Asia and Southeast Asia. And the other issue is about increasing our options. The multi-aligned foreign policy that the government is following, which is good, and strengthening of outer area contingency, regional stability operations. This is not my idea; it's an IDSA task force report. It's also an IDSA Asian strategic review, which has come out, which stresses these issues, and of course, enhance people-to-people interaction. The very limited tourist flows, for instance, between India and ASEAN, India and West Asia. So all of these, I think, are going to help expand the space for India's diplomatic options. Thank you.